Okay, so graphing cosine is going to be very, very similar to graphing sine, except for, if you remember, sine started at the origin, went up to the maximum, down to the axis, back up to the axis, and so on. Sorry, down to minimum, back up to the axis, and it went like this. So this is sine. Cosine, however, doesn't start at the axis, it starts at the maximum. Then, on your next critical value, it's going to go to the axis. On your next critical value, it's going to be at the minimum, axis, maximum. And so it looks just like sine, only it's shifted over a little bit. That's what cosine looks like. Okay, so let me draw a cleaner one here. Again, cosine, we put in our critical values, right? You figure out what all those are. And cosine starts at the maximum, axis, minimum, axis, maximum, axis, and so on. And so we just keep following this pattern. And so then cosine is going to look something along these lines. So the big idea, the big thing that we're going to focus on is where does it start? And then go from there. Otherwise, everything's the same. Amplitude, vertical shift, phase shift, all of that stuff is the same. So let's look at an example. So here, I'm going to take some notes. My amplitude, then I'm going to look at the number in front of cosine. That's my A value. My amplitude is 1/2. Okay, the period is going to be 2 pi again, divided by the B value, the number in front of x, which is 4. So this period will be pi over 2, which means my width of my quarters, I'm going to take pi over 2 times 1/4, and that'll give me pi over 8. So this is going to be a little guy. My phase shift, that 1 is not inside with the x. There's actually nothing inside with the x, so there is no phase shift. And then my vertical shift, I have that 1 at the end, it's going to be 1 up. So to graph this one, my amplitude is 1/2, so if this is 1, this will be 1/2. Okay, the period is pi over 2, the width of the quarters is pi over 8. So we got pi over 8, and then we got another pi over 8, that would be pi over 4. Another pi over 8, that would be 3 pi over 8. Remember, we started at 0, so how many do I have? I have 4 so far. And then another one gets me pi over 2, which is 4 pi over 8. So make sure you reduce these things when you write them. All right, my vertical shift is 1 up. So if I put in my vertical shift, I'm actually going to be going up to 3/2 and down to 1/2. All right, now to graph. So everything so far that I've done on this problem is but exactly the same as I would have done on sine. The difference now is cosine doesn't start at the axis. Cosine starts at the maximum, and then the axis, and then the minimum, axis, and maximum. And so there's our graph of one cycle. Okay, and then we could keep on going and get ourselves the rest of another cycle, but you get the idea. Okay, so this would be how you graph cosine. Again, exactly the same way as sine, except when we start at the maximum and then work our way around.